Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television, our community connected. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. We are at Options on Plaza Avenue in Hayes in the offices of Options, Domestic and Sexual Violence Services Incorporated, with the Executive Director, Charlotte Linsner, and Advocate for Options, Dennis Becking. And we thank our guests for being with us today. Dennis, let's start, if we might, with you. Explain the purpose of Options to us and who you serve.
Options, our program is a crisis intervention program where we have individuals who have either gone through domestic violence, are going through that, or sexual violence in some way. And we come alongside those individuals at a particular time. And our long-term focus is, in our mission statement, I think there's two basic points. One is we want to empower that individual, help that person see that they have what it takes to move forward with life. And then as well, we want to be involved within the community, helping the community understand the dynamics of both domestic and sexual violence.
Who is impacted primarily by domestic and sexual violence? Is it still women, as we come to think?
Yeah, basically the numbers out there that you're going to find about 85% of the victims in domestic and sexual assault are going to be female.
The executive director for now 14 years, although she spent some 30 years in the process of counseling and working with individuals, is Charlotte Linsner, executive director at Options. Charlotte, if you would talk about the approach of Options and how maybe it's changed over time with your long term with the organization.
Well, I can remember when I first started how mostly it was kind of grassroots, how we would work with the victims, and maybe only house them for 3 days, and then they would end up going back to wherever it was that they came from. Some of them got away and went to family and stuff like that. The evolution of everything is that we are now more client oriented. So we say, where are you? Where do you want to go? What services can we provide? How can we refer you to something? And also we also work with the family. Before we worked with the victim only, now we also work, we call them secondary victims. The victims themselves have kind of pushed this, knowing that there's more out there that they need, but so also has the funding streams. They are requiring that we really prove that we are providing the best victims that we can for our, services for our victims that we can provide.
And you talk about family impact. Talk a little about that, Charlotte.
Domestic violence impacts the whole family. It impacts the whole community. Anytime you have someone who is being abused, their whole focus on what life really should be or is totally skewed. It's just not right. So it impacts our community by that person maybe not being able to go to work. It impacts the family by that one person might have physical conditions that she normally wouldn't have, he or she, wouldn't normally have. So there's costs there. There's cost of psychological counseling possible. So there's a lot of cost to the family itself.
Explore a common perception that we'd like to dispel if possible, Dennis, and that is, why doesn't the victim simply leave?
There's a lot of different reasons why they may not leave. Again, when you begin to get into a little bit of their history, you may find that some of the threats that are being made towards other family members, towards themselves, those kinds of things. There can be the financial issues that are continually being brought up. You also just have a victim is brought into a situation, not that the abuser says, I'm going to start abusing you and you're going to be in an abusive relationship, but there's a grooming factor where they're drawn in. And sometimes that victim can begin to look at the abuser as being a real troubled person, and they may be the only person or they feel they're the only person that has any power to make a difference in that person's life. But there's a number of different reasons why that person will enter back into that relationship again.
Part of it is a power situation, isn't it, Dennis?
Yes. Basically, when we talk about domestic violence and even sexual assault, it's an issue of power and control over another person's life. And so the abuser, as I describe it a lot of times with clients, is that this abuser is wanting to have power over the victim. And so as a result of that, they're doing everything that they can to keep that kind of relationship. The minute this person maybe step outside of that, you'll begin to see threats and violence, just increase. Why? Because they've moved from outside of that power and control. And the whole focus is we want to draw them back under here again to keep them there.
And part of that can come from financial, it can come from physical. There are a lot of different aspects of the power mode going.
Correct.
Charlotte, talk a bit about the program BIP as we're talking about changes over the organization. Tell us about that program.
When we're talking about funding streams, giving some different kind of resources, one of the things that has come up in the last 5 years is called BIP. It's the Batterers Intervention Program. And we do have one here in Hayes. It's called Strategies for Change. And it comes out of the court system. So if you have been convicted of an abusive situation, you will be asked to go to the BIP program. And it's about, if I remember right, it's a 26-week course, and it's a very good course. Tom and Vicki Runge run that course. But you can also say you think you might possibly be an abuser, you can go yourself. You can get in touch with Tom and Vicki, and you can go through it yourself, and it's really a good program of explaining to the abuser sometimes why they abuse. Is this something that they've lived with all their life and they just don't know any different? Is this their normal? And it's a chance for them to really look at why they abuse and when they abuse.
And Charlotte, often this abusing situation by the abuser is learned behavior, isn't it?
Very much learned behavior. We do know a child is not born to abuse. It's, they're educated in it. Just like you're educated with your ABCs, you're educated to abuse.
Dennis, talk a bit about the mechanics of options. What happens when the phone rings, for example, whether it's either someone in distress themselves or a neighbor or someone outside, someone within the family that thinks that there might be a problem. Talk about the mechanics, would you?
Okay. First of all, I just want to let people know that our services are free, they're confidential, and they're non-judgmental. And we want to make sure that people understand that, and we will serve the total population in the area of domestic or sexual violence. Doesn't make any difference, religious background, race, creed, whatever. We're here to serve people along that line. But a person calls our office, they're going to be speaking, first of all, with a trained advocate who is going to begin to talk through their situation, assess what is taking place, and beginning to see what needs to take place. In some situations where it's very severe, we may begin to start talking about shelter house and making provision in that way. But we want to make sure, first of all, that that person is going to be in a safe location. And then we provide peer counseling where we can meet one-on-one with that individual. And one of the things that I like about that is the fact that you get to know this person, you begin to understand what is the power and control that was being used in that situation, and how can we begin to help that person think through, what they bring to the table within that. Part of the peer counseling is also going to involve safety planning. We want to make sure that person is going to be in a position where they're going to be safe, and it can involve going to the courts and seeking out a protection from abuse order, or it can be involved in just how they can make their home secure, in a given situation. And then we provide other services, advocacy services, where we'll go to court with them, go to meetings with lawyers, medical, those types of things, as well as the SANE program, Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program. And so there's a lot of different advocacy type things that we are involved in there as well. And then we make a lot of referrals, begin to recognize where this person is at this point in their life, what are the needs that they have, and help them to be able to seek out the types of groups, organizations that are going to help them to meet those needs. And then part of it is just the education part as well, where we're kind of like what we're doing today, just making people aware of the issue. And again, domestic and sexual violence can only thrive in silence. As long as you keep things quiet and nobody knows, it just thrives. And so we want to be out there making sure people understand that it is taking place.
Literally letting that individual know there are options indeed. Charlotte, there are two things in our visits over the years that you've highlighted. That's the community support and the support of law enforcement that is so important to the outcomes to be favorable for options individuals.
Well, needless to say, Mike, we've said this many times, without the community, we wouldn't be here. Funding only goes so far, and that just keeps less and less as far as the grants are anymore. It's tighter, those funds, tighter to get a hold of. We cover a huge area, 18 counties in northwest Kansas, from the Russell County line to Nebraska, and then Russell County line to Colorado. So we have a huge area. We do it with 13 advocates, 2 offices, the main office here in Hayes, and the office in Colby, where we only have 1 advocate who does 9 counties herself. So, it's a huge area. It's a huge responsibility that we take very seriously about working and helping people. If you can't escape it, at least learn how to not make it, you end up being killed. One of the worst things in the world is the questions often asked of us is, why doesn't that person leave? Did you know that there could be 75% chance of being killed when they decide to leave? When Dennis was telling you about this control, the biggest control in the world is for you to kill someone.
You mentioned also talking about the options program and the necessity for letting people know. We think of rural America as being insulated from that. However, at the shelter, you have a different story to tell.
With the shelter?
By
the number of people. Yes, we within a 3-year period, we served 190 women who stayed in our shelter. We served 188 children who stayed in our shelter. On an average, we had 3.2 people staying in the shelter every night. So that definitely tells a different story. We're really, truly not insulated.
Do you receive any funding from the state, federal government?
We have competitive grants. We have to write those grants. We're not guaranteed any dollars. The state does give us a very small grant through general funding, but we still have to write the grant for it. The rest of it is donations from many, many good people.
Charlotte, from your 14 years as executive director and your 30 years in this, give us, in the final minute, a success story, if you could, that you could relate to us.
Well, one of the biggest success stories the organization itself has is having a male advocate. There's very few programs across our state. There's 30 programs across our state, and there's only 2 that have male advocates. Having men come in, and the men who do not abuse, and having them speak, and whether it's by presence or by speaking, is a huge success story for us. Huge success story for us.
We wish you the best in your coming days as you retire from the executive director position, but fortunately for us, not retiring from options totally.
That's correct. It's time to give it to someone who has a little bit more vitality and energy than I have anymore. So I'm looking forward to taking it a little bit easier, but when your heart's so involved in something, we talked earlier a little bit about it being cyclical. My grandfather was extremely abusive. My stepfather was extremely abusive. So, yeah, I'm one of those generations who said, no more.
Broke the mold.
No more. Broke the mold.
Charlotte Linsner, Executive Director, and Dennis Becking, who is the advocate for Options Incorporated, Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. Thanks to you for watching Community Connection.